Hello, welcome to hashtag Psychotherapy Unfold. As you know, I'm Mark Fielding, psychotherapist and relationship counsellor, and your host. As you know, we're kind of doing quite a lot of podcasts at the moment, which has been great. We've got another really, really interesting podcast for you today, and I'd like to introduce Giovanna Hammond. Giovanna is an accredited mental health social worker who works as a critical incident and trauma counsellor. She extends her work as an Australian independent filmmaker and actress. She has turned her experiences advocating for clients' mental health into a full-length feature film and a popular television series. She aims to shine the light on important issues such as bullying, domestic violence, under her film company Locked In Productions. Giovanna aired series 4 of her popular television series, The Travel Counsellor, broadcast on Channel 31, and her second full-length feature film, The Target, officially opened on Are You OK Day. We'll ask Giovanna a bit about all of these projects during the podcast. She continues to work on movies about mental health whilst working her full-time job as a critical incident counsellor. So thank you very much for coming on, Giovanna. Nice to meet you.
You're very welcome. Nice to meet you too.
Yeah, I mean, you bring so much to the table. We'll try and touch on as many things as we can. I always kind of start off by asking our guests the personal experiences that led them into the field, and obviously you can say as much or as little as you're happy with about that. But yeah,
Sure,
what
sure.
led you
Okay.
into the field?
Well, I used to be a preschool educator years ago, and then I became a primary school teacher. So effectively, my career was a teacher. And I got a new job in a primary school, and it was in the lower socioeconomic area of Melbourne in Australia. And I had never, ever come across children who were so reactive and angry and throwing tables across the
Yeah,
room and throwing chairs, and you just have to look at them the wrong way for them to be
yeah,
set off. And I remember standing in front of the classroom thinking, why are these children so young and so mad, in the sense of angry?
yeah,
I'm like, what kind of leads them to behave this way? And I had this pivotal moment where because I was a music and drama teacher, but without, just unknowingly, I ended up turning my classes into a music and drama like therapy session every session without realizing I was doing it. So this one particular day, I decided to group the children off into groups of 4, and I said, okay guys, I want you to write a little story, just two paragraphs long. Then you're going to act it out. So half of the group can do the music and the sound effects, and the other half of the group can do the acting. And they were really excited about doing this project. And I said, just whatever you do, show me the story first, because whenever I asked them to do stories, I noticed they were doing stories about drug, alcohol, and sexual activity at such a
yeah,
young age, which
yeah,
of course is inappropriate in the classroom.
yeah,
So I said, let me have a look at your stories first. When I approve it, then you can go off and do your
yeah,
project. And I had this one young man, he came up to me, and and I will never, ever, as long as I live, forget this. He said, I was walking down the street at 12 o'clock at night. I saw a girl in an alley. I went up to her, I raped her and chopped her head off. And I had never heard such a young person speak this way. Remember, I was a teacher. I wasn't a mental
yeah,
health worker at all in
yeah,
those days. So everything was such a big shock to me. And I was a bit young at the time as well. And I just looked at him and my jaw dropped. I actually didn't even know what to say.
yeah,
And he just looked at me and said, it's really funny, Mrs. Hammond, isn't it? It's really funny. And I just said, actually, it's not funny. I'm actually really sad about this story, because this lady would have been somebody's daughter and maybe somebody's mother, or it's somebody's person that they love, and you've raped them, which means you've hurt them, and you've chopped their head off, which now means you've murdered them. And I could just see him looking dead. He'd looked me dead in the eye, and he was really thinking about it. He was really surprised at my reaction at
yeah,
first, but then he started thinking about it. Then this other boy in the class, because of course by that stage all the kids crowded around me,
sure,
and the another boy said, you know, you're right, Mrs. Hammond. It's not fun to be raped, because my mum was raped in the kitchen when I was sleeping, and bang, that changed my life. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't want to be a teacher anymore. I want to be a counsellor. That's what I want to be. And so not long after that, I became a stay-at-home mum. I had my first child, and I said to my husband, I'm going to use this time to study and become an accredited mental health social worker. While I'm a stay-at-home mum, I'll study. And that's it. I have never looked back, but that child changed my life.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Goodness me. I mean, I can see why that was such a powerful moment for you, you know, and I guess working as, I mean, I guess working as a, you know, music and drama teacher, I guess you've probably been able to use the skills in part from those two disciplines in your, you know, in your mental health work.
Absolutely. I just allowed them to express themselves in a different way,
Yeah.
rather than using words. And these kids were completely different kids by the end of the year.
Yeah. And I guess seeing, I mean, I guess it must have been shocking seeing so much trauma.
Yeah, that's just something I never came. I guess I just wasn't exposed to it. I lived, you know, I've got an Italian background. Being an Italian female, you're very, very sheltered from the real world. And I just had never seen children behave that way or speak in that manner. And so they helped me grow up very fast. I taught them stuff, they taught me stuff, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And then it's obvious, I guess, how that then led you into the field. And I wanted for our listeners, and also for me, because I don't really know much about, you know, critical incident kind of counselling. Could you maybe say a bit around what it is and just maybe some of your experiences within it? Yeah.
Yeah. So firstly, when I first became a social worker, I just got into family therapy, working with children, adolescents, and families. So that helped me really develop skills. So 15 years later, I ended up falling into a new job and a new field, which was specifically on trauma, but working mainly with adults. So we have here in Australia the employee assistant program.
Oh, yeah.
So it's for people in the workplace. You know, if something, you know, a little bit challenging or upsetting happens in the workplace, they can call the counsellor that the work pays for. So that's our EAP section. But I'm in the critical incident and trauma team, where if something happens in the workplace, it brings me there. So it could be, you know, if a work colleague passes away, or if a customer is aggressive, or if something happens on the news, for example, and they say counsellors are on the scene, that's us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's when something extremely heightened and traumatic happens at that moment, then the critical incident team will come in and counsel witnesses, counsel, you know, whoever is feeling traumatized.
Yeah. Such important work. Goodness me. I mean, such important work. But I mean, being a kind of counsellor in those situations must be incredibly difficult for you as well, because you're hearing and you're experiencing people in the midst of trauma, and that's incredibly difficult, obviously.
You need to get used to remembering why you're there and not feeling the emotion. So I basically put myself in a bubble. So as I'm driving to the scene, I know automatically that everybody's going to be extremely heightened. In some cases, you might have media around, or they've been around. You know, it's been on the news, or, you know, it no matter what the incident is, I know when I'm going to go to that scene, it's going to be heightened. So when I was in private practice, for example, I was counselling my clients way after the incident occurred. Well, this time I'm right there at that moment, or soon after that moment. So people, it's a little bit different in the way you speak with clients in this situation. Because you might be talking to them, but you know they're not in the moment. They're not listening. They can see your mouth move and they might be reacting, but they will have no memory of even talking to you. So it's a very different type of practice.
Yeah, because they're in the midst of the trauma. I mean, could I just ask you, tell me, would it be okay just to ask a bit more about that? You know, in terms of the counselling skills that you use, how does that differ from when you're working longer term with clients?
So when you go to a scene when a traumatic event has happened, it could be, for example, a child drowning, or a colleague has gotten their hand stuck in a machine, for example, and they've been critically injured and they've been taken to the hospital, or something to that effect. I don't want to get too graphic because I really don't want to disturb our listeners. But let's just say, something you wouldn't want to happen to anyone So the thing is even when a person is safe, like they might have had an accident in the workplace, and even though the colleagues know that person is safe because the ambulance now have them and they're on their way to the hospital and they're okay, a lot of people have seen this injury occur. And so now when I present myself to the clients, their brain is actually not attached to their body at that time. So their brain is in the past, and it's thinking, oh my gosh, so I was doing this and I was doing that, and then he did this, and then he went into the machine, and then I turned the machine on, and then this happened and that happened. That person is still thinking about that, but also then the brain goes into the future and starts thinking, was this my fault? What did I do? Hang on, I turned it on, but I told him not to go near the machine first. And so they're going about, they're thinking of the past, but they're then in the future, like, am I going to get in trouble now? What does this mean? Am I involved? Am I this? Am I that? Or what if it happens to me? What if it happens to someone else I know? And then their anxiety starts to rise. And we know the fight, flight, freeze mode, flop mode, all that happens. So the trauma response, I'm actually in front of a person who's now experiencing a trauma response.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's very different to private practice, for example, because by the time I would see a client in private practice, it might have been a month later or a few weeks later, because there might have been a waiting list, or, so they've had time to maybe calm themselves a little bit. They're a little bit more distant from the traumatic event. This time I'm right there in that moment. So I know that when I speak to them, they're not necessarily hearing what I'm saying because their brain's in the past and it's in the future. And the one place they're not is in the present moment.
But I guess helping them, I mean, even though that they are kind of maybe dissociated, or that their mind is not in the present, I guess the benefits to them of being able to start processing what's happened in the moment, even though they are very, very kind of activated, I mean, going forwards, that's going to be immensely helpful for them in terms of managing the trauma going forwards.
Absolutely, because it can actually help. It works towards preventing them from getting post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay, interesting.
Pressure for us is doing a good job right at that moment. Everything matters. So I'm going to tell you, just so you get an idea of where people are at that time. When I first started in trauma in this industry, one of my very first big jobs was when I attended a very, very distressing incident which involved a child. So there were different teams of staff members who were either involved or they vicariously were involved. So they heard about what was going on, or they could see the ambulance and police turn up. They could see what was going on, but didn't know why at the time. So that's vicarious. So we're dealing with vicarious trauma. And also the people who are effectively involved in the traumatic event. So this one time I had to go from one team to another. So I had to do a psych education session where I was talking about, the trauma responses. I make them aware of the type of things they might experience over the next few hours, the next few days, the next few weeks. So once I do that group session, then I get to speak with them individually. Now, there was this one client, and this was my first experience of this, is I was talking to him and I was given all this amazing information, and I was so proud of myself because I knew that information was going to help him. And, I'm like, he's going to be okay. He's now aware. He's aware of what, of what to expect. And one of the last things I said to him, the very, very last things I said is, oh, and by the way, just to help you sleep tonight, there are certain foods that can promote good sleep. So eating a banana actually can help promote having a good sleep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if you actually look up top 10 foods to promote good sleep, a banana is the first thing that comes up. So we always know bananas to give you energy, but it also promotes sleep. So I just said, and by the way, maybe have a banana before bed tonight because it can actually help you go to sleep. Anyway, so because he was just so not in the moment, and I walked away thinking, yeah, he really got this and I think he's going to be okay. And then his manager went up to him and said, oh, how was the session? He goes, oh, it was all right. She just told me to eat a banana. So that was the only thing he remembered from the whole time I was with him.
Yeah.
That was such a valuable lesson for me because I'm like, yeah, you know what? Simplify, say less, and do more of the mindfulness stuff. So then I developed a sensory kit. It's got Play-Doh in it. It's got bubbles. It's got, I'm holding up some spongy toys here where it's sensory. So I then learned to regulate a person's emotions before I educate.
Yeah.
So sometimes clients want to just talk about, so the one thing we don't do as trauma counselors, we don't sit there and say, hey, what happened? And where were you at the time? And what did you do? We never, ever, ever ask for details. We just sit and wait for them to say what they need to get off their chest.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just say this is a safe place. I basically provide a safe and confidential space for them to be able to offload whatever they want, but I never ask what happened.
Yeah.
And then that helps me gauge where they're at. So whether I need to regulate them first and kind of lower their emotions first, or whether they just want to get everything off their chest and do the talking part first, and then I might do a grounding activity or a sensory activity before they leave. So I've had to learn to read the room.
Yeah.
You cannot do this if you don't know how to read the room.
Yeah, and that's kind of what was on my mind. I mean, I think about the vastness really of your skill set, because from what you've said, in a critical incident you can be dealing with many different people, and of course they all bring their own kind of histories and their own personality types and their own ways of being in the world. But and so I guess you're tailoring yours, and also the way they've reacted to the trauma, like you say. So in the moment you're tailoring your response to multiple people who are all kind of traumatized, and I think for our listeners, I mean, just watching something that's traumatic, can lead to somebody having PTSD. I mean, that can be traumatizing.
And you never know what's going to happen. So I've been on scenes for example, customer aggression.
Yeah.
Now, it's a COVID thing, but I'm hearing about it more now than I ever have in my life before, where customers are extremely aggressive to workers. And we get a lot of call outs for customer aggression. And it just so happened, it's happened to me about 2 or 3 times now, where I'm actually on a scene and I'm, doing the counseling for the staff members who are telling me about this man that came in and he started throwing things around and he didn't get what he wanted at the time and he got quite aggressive. So they'd be telling me that. And just as I was working with the group, the customer came back and I actually got to experience the incident. So I got caught. It's happened about 2 or 3 times to me now. But I'm really grateful for that experience. Like, I don't even feel scared. I don't know if it's just my way of going into a bit of a freeze mode. I'm not sure, or I'm just such in a professional mindset at that time. I'm seeing it as an educational opportunity. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but when something like that happens, I'm like, wow, so this is what it feels like. This is what it feels like. My heart's beating so fast. I'm actually starting to shake. And then I have to remember, whoa, stop. You're the counselor. They're all looking at you, waiting for some assistance. So then I just go into, right, okay, everybody, stand up. Let's go in this room. So actually people just follow me, shut the doors. The place goes into lockdown. The managers deal with everything else that's going on in there, but I've got the group. And to me, I just suddenly feel like, okay, these guys are under my care now.
Yeah.
So I'm like, so I bring them all in the moment. I'm like, okay, I can see that it's the customer is outside of the building now. We're in lockdown. Right here, right now, you're all safe. Right here, right now, he cannot hurt you. He will not hurt you. Right here, right now, we're all together and everything's okay. So I asked the group first to sit in a very tight circle, like they put their chairs in a circle and their knees are touching. And of course, again, you have to read the room with that.
Yeah.
But you give them the option. If you don't want to be part of this, please do what you need to do to feel safe and comfortable. If you need to be somewhere else, please do that. And if you want to be part of this, let's sit in a circle. So we create a closed circle and we just don't talk. We don't talk. Just let's take a bit of a breather and I take them through some diaphragm breathing.
Yeah.
And I said, if you want to hold hands, you can hold hands. If you just want to sit here, but let's just breathe together. And we breathe through it because the noise, the biggest thing that really taught me about the stresses of an aggressive customer, it's the actual noise that they create, because they're banging things, they're kicking on the doors. I actually felt like the building was going to collapse at one stage.
Yeah.
So it's not, so you've really got to say the right thing as well right at that moment. Yeah. And it can be a bit of pressure when you're first getting used to this type of industry, but after a while you get the hang of it.
Yeah.
But everything you say and do really matters, because remember, they're all in a very heightened state.
Yeah.
If you say one wrong thing, well, you'll get complaints, that's for sure. So you'll get complaints later because they're already heightened. Yeah. So they'll be responding to everything you do and everything you say. Yeah. They may not be the way they normally would be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm going to maybe move on now and talk about some of your other projects. But I mean, just before we kind of leave this, I mean, your ability to self-regulate in the moment, I mean, goodness me, I mean, you must be able to do that really well. You have to do that, don't you?
The moment, so if my manager was sitting with me right now, he'd be like, yeah, he's so in control in the moment.
Yeah.
But I will fall to pieces later, and I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I think it's okay because you need to get it out.
Yeah.
So sometimes it affects me more than sometimes I'm not bothered at all. And I don't think that's natural. I'm like, shouldn't I be bothered by this? Why isn't it bothering me? Like, why am I not affected?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes I can separate myself and just see it as this is my job. I'm in the bubble. The bubble was really thick and was very strong at the time.
Yeah.
And other times it might penetrate a little bit deeper in than I want it to. So then I'm really in control at the time. But later on, I might have a bit of a cry.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, healthy.
Yeah. I totally agree. Yeah. And I guess you have supervision, you talk about, what's happening.
Yes.
And that's a, an important space, I think, for all of us. I mean, I'm going to segue a little bit into your film, The Target, because that deals, and correct me if I'm, but that deals with workplace bullying. So I guess it's quite a good segue from where we are to in that. I mean, I'm really interested to hear more about that.
Okay, so The Target came across. See, I like to use real life stories. So I've been a performing artist since the age of 5. I'm an extremely active person. I do all sorts of things. I do music, I do acting, I do piano playing, just anything with performing arts. I want to do it, right? So, but I really, really adore my mental health work, and I don't want to give anything up. So I'm like, how cool would it be to combine everything together?
Yeah.
So years ago, I was severely bullied in the workplace because I was a really, really hard worker. And people don't like hard workers because it tends to rub people up the wrong way. In the sense of, because the manager at the time was complimenting me with my work in front of everybody, and other people were getting a bit upset about that. So I became a target. That's why it's called The Target.
Oh, interesting.
And I actually, as terrible and horrific as that bullying was at the time, I really appreciate the experience looking back. I'm okay. I got through it okay, even though at the time I was falling to pieces. But I remember thinking, wow, so this is what it feels like. So I know now not to say, oh, don't worry about the bullies, just move on, just leave them, just don't worry, just walk away.
Yeah.
It's not that easy. And I'm so glad I got to understand that. So for my own closure, I decided to write a script about it, just to get a little bit of my story out.
Yeah.
And through that, when I was telling people about, hey, I'm going to write a movie about bullying, people started telling me about their bully stories. And I'm like, hey, can I use that story? And of course I would change it a little bit. But before I knew it, I had 125 cast and crew members, all volunteers.
Wow.
Who wanted to be part of this project. And they were all telling me a bit of their story, a bit of this and a bit of that. And I got to integrate these stories. Like I got to make some of it up, but most of it are true stories. It's all true stories. And I've made a movie about it. And it was extremely therapeutic for every single person who participated in it, because it was our way of getting our stories out and educating others on what bullying is, how it affects people. So it turned into this huge community project, and the council ended up funding us.
Fantastic.
So they gave us, and you know, when I say funded, it's not like Hollywood. You know, there's still volunteer actors, and some people have never acted before, so it's not a Hollywood movie. But the story was so rich, it ended up being on Amazon Prime worldwide. And I think it might still be on there, because they put it on and off. It just keeps going back on there. So that's how that happened.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you how our listeners can watch the film. So I mean, Amazon Prime is one. I mean, if they want to kind of watch the film, how else?
And it was on some YouTube streaming, but I do have DVDs as well. But I think Amazon Prime is the best way. But I guess if people would like a copy of the DVD, they can just find me on LinkedIn, Giovanna Hammond, and they can just inbox me, or I'm on Facebook. If they go on Locked In Productions, they can inbox me there and say, hey, I'd like a copy of your movie, and I'll make arrangements.
Yeah, and great, and we'll put all of your contact details and all of your links onto our social media sites after the show. I mean, I just wanted to pick up, and the workplace bullying is something that I've worked with a lot. I mean, I worked in many years ago, really. I mean, I worked in an organization, I won't say the name of the organization, and I was a kind of harassment advisor. So I was a person that would counsel people that were bullied in the workplace, and often I think, and this is maybe a bit of a generalization, but organizations and I think individuals that are bullied can tend to minimize those experiences, and often I think it's trauma. I mean, bullying across the board, I think can be incredibly traumatic, and it can happen anywhere. It can happen at school, can happen in the workplace. But I don't know, people in the workplace that are bullied consistently, it's I don't know, the effect on their mental health, their self-confidence. People can have nervous breakdowns, people can be led into depression. It is enormously important. So the film, I think, is really much needed, because it's not always talked about, is it, workplace bullying?
And Mark, I will send you a copy of the movie. And it's also about, it covers many different types of bullying. It's not just workplace. It's how different types of bullying affects different people of different ages.
Interesting.
So we've got schoolyard bullying. Effectively, it's about a lady who her husband, she's at her husband's funeral, and I'm not going to give away too much. She's at a funeral, and she's talking about bullying, and as the people who are in the church, as they're listening to her, the camera goes to all different random people, and it scrolls right to their face. And then they're having a flashback on how they're getting bullied. So it turns out that most of the people in that church are actually currently getting bullied, and it's showing different types of bullying. But it also teaches what to do when you're getting bullied. Okay, so there are scenes in there to teach how to handle it. So the basic fundamentals, you write who, what, where, how it's affecting you, and you report it. Organizations look, many organizations do not know how to handle bullying, but I do think they're getting better as they are getting better at it. And I don't know about in the UK, but here in Australia, there are laws now where CEOs of organizations can go to prison for 10 years if their organization does not handle bullying effectively and properly.
That's really good.
It's called Brodie's Law. So Brodie was a young lady who died via suicide due to being bullied. And now there's Brodie's Law. People can Google it. It's an amazing law. But yeah, I think workplaces still need to get a little bit better at dealing with it, because I find that when, you know, say for example, if two people are getting bullied, they'll offer the survivor of bullying, they'll ask, how about we move you to another team?
Yeah.
And I think, hang on a minute, no. You should be educating the perpetrator that, hey, if you don't stop the bullying, here's what you're doing. Here's how it's affecting other people. This is not okay in our organization. And if that doesn't stop, you're going to be moved.
Yeah, I agree.
Because why does the survivor or the victim of bullying, why should they be the one to have to move?
Yeah.
It should be their choice, at least be a choice. Would you like to move, or do you want to stay here? But then they need to be dealing. So I don't know, it just feels like sometimes employers are a little bit apprehensive. They don't really know how to deal with it. And I don't blame them, because it's not an easy thing, you know, but hey, it's very traumatic. And I remember I'm a very confident person, and I was getting withdrawn, and I was crying on my way to work. I was crying on the way back from work. My confidence was getting stripped, and it happens so slowly that you don't realize until you hit your bottom level.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree. You know, I mean, workplace bullying is maybe we don't have a law like that here, and I think we really, really need one. You know, and it often can be, you know, it can be a drip feed, and I think with workplace bullying, sometimes it can be really overt, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's maybe just social isolation. You know, maybe someone being excluded, and that on the surface doesn't sound so bad, but you know, but having to go into a toxic environment and be socially excluded from the group, and this is just one aspect of bullying, so traumatic. I mean, I'm so conscious of the time. Goodness me, I'm trying to get through all of the things that you do. Let's move on. I really want to hear about the travel counsellor, because this is something else that, you know, that is an ongoing project. I mean, could you tell our listeners a bit more about that?
Yes. Now, this is a bittersweet thing for me at the moment, and you'll understand why very soon. Now, prior to being a trauma counsellor to what I'm doing now, I was in private practice for 7 years. But I didn't want to practice in an office. I wanted to get to the people who couldn't make their way to for whatever reason. So I was actually counselling in their homes. So I would visit schools, I would visit homes, wherever it was easy for me to get to, I would go to them. Okay. So I thought, wow, you know what? What about if there's people at home who just are scared of counselling? How can I reach them? How can I tell them that, hey, counselling is so cool, because it's really just a conversation, and it can actually unclog you. It can just make just someone to talk to about things, and you don't really have to be careful the way you word things. You don't have to worry about offending. You can just offload, right? But I'm like, how can I get to those people? So again, I thought, wow, why don't I do a TV show about this? So again, I got my volunteers. Hey guys, I want to do a show called The Travel Counsellor. And basically it was based on the work that I do. It was a counsellor who goes to people's homes and does counselling sessions and covers many, many, many different projects. And the actors, I started getting inundated by messages saying, I want to be on your show. I've got a story. You know, when I was little, this happened to me, blah, 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 blah. And everyone would just start sharing their stories. And I'm like, okay, guys, yes, you can definitely be on the show. You can definitely act in it 1,000%. I'm just a little bit worried about the ethical thing about using somebody's real story. They're like, no, I really want to share my story. And I'm like, I just don't know. Like, is this ethical? Like, I started really worrying about, like, am I taking advantage of people's stories? Like, is this ethical? I don't know. How do I do this? So then what I did is I thought, all right, how about, because the actors started getting so passionate about it. They're like, one man in particular, he goes, listen, G, I'm 50 years old. I think I know by now if I want to, share my story to the world or not. So I want to do this, and I don't care about your ethics, but I want to do it for me. And I'm like, why do you want to do it so much like that? And he said, because by sharing my story, I know that I'm going to help other people in my situation. And I'm like, bang, yes, that's exactly what this is about.
Yeah.
But I made the agreement with every actor who wanted to share their real stories, under the proviso that I get to change some details of the story.
Sure.
So by changing it, it made me feel a little bit better about it, because I'm like, okay, so some is fictional, but it's real enough for them to feel this satisfaction that they're helping others. So in the very last, just before COVID, I said to my DOP, he's my director of photographer. So for people who don't know what that is, it's the person who actually has the camera and actually films the program. His name was Steve. I said, hey, Steve, I've got this idea, but I really want you to do some acting. He goes, me? Gee, I can't act. No, I'm the video guy. I said, no, I can really see you play this part of a farmer, because he had this big bushy beard that I loathed. Like, I couldn't tell him enough how much I hated this big beard, but it actually inspired a storyline based on this beard.
Yeah.
And it was about a man with depression who was thinking about ending his life by hanging himself. And he agreed to actually do this. He said, all right, I'll do it as a challenge, and I found another video, a guy to film it, and it was improvisation. So I made it, it wasn't hard. And he turned out he really enjoyed doing it, right? Anyway, so that was the last one before COVID. Now, during COVID, I rang him up just to see how he was going. And he said to me, hey, that scene where, my character was holding that rope and contemplating ending life? And he kind of expressed to me the personal feelings he had around that scene.
Yeah.
Okay. And it was something I wasn't aware of. And he was really reflective about it, like very reflective. And he said, you're really saving lives, G. You're really saving lives, because, I have had these thoughts before of ending life. He goes, but I'd never do it. I'd never, ever do it. But, the thoughts have been there.
Yeah.
And so we had this really big open discussion about it. And unfortunately, because COVID in Victoria dragged on for so long with the lockdowns, we had 6 lockdowns, and he was on his own for such a long time. Unfortunately, he ended his life, not by the way his character did. So because I'm just sharing this story because I want to teach people that staying connected to others is actually really important.
Yeah.
And so when I did the travel counselor, it wasn't just about sharing stories. It wasn't just about acting. It wasn't just about all that. It was also about connectiveness and people having the same idea to help others.
Yeah.
We had so much fun on sets. We did so much good stuff. We felt like we had a purpose, and we're doing all this amazing stuff. And when all that connection stopped, people became mentally unwell.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have not done another segment since, because I just haven't had that will to do it, because he's no longer with us. So I'm slowly getting my feet back into it by doing documentaries on mental health. I'm getting back into it. So I'm hoping eventually I may get back into doing that TV show, because we were starting to get fan mail as well. And people were starting to, audiences were starting to write to me and saying, wow, that session you did on anxiety, I never understood why I was feeling these feelings. And now I get it. Because the show was about sharing strategies. It wasn't just about stories. It was a counselor it was effectively a real counselling session.
Yeah.
So if people would like to watch that, that is on my YouTube channel, Locked In Productions. If you just scroll down, you'll see many, many, many different stories. And it covers so many stories. It covers many, many mental health topics.
Yeah, and wow, such a fantastic project. I guess people see, I mean, there's so many different layers, you know, to it, but I guess people seeing, you know, a kind of counselling session and that demystifying that, you know, and also people's experiences, sharing anxiety, and so helpful, such important work, you know, and the film's also, you know, kind of, you know, allowing people to, you know, to really kind of connect with what goes on in the workplace, bullying. We're almost out of time. It's gone so quickly. I always finish the show by asking, you know, my guests their favorite kind of go-to coping strategies for sustaining good mental health. What would you say? What do you do?
Hobbies. Without hobbies, I don't know what I would do, where I would be. That's why lockdown was so hard, because a lot of the hobbies had to stop. However, as you can see, Mark, but I know the listeners can't see, I've got a grand piano behind me. This house is full of instruments, you know, so hobbies. Engage yourself in a good work-life balance situation. If you don't have a hobby, please, please, please research, go get yourself one, because it really does connect you with like-minded people. And you just feel so happy because you're doing something that's other than work, and there's no life stresses in it. It's all about fun, and it's playtime. And we as adults need playtime. So I play a lot. So there you go. That's what I do.
Fantastic. And I just want to say, Giovanna, goodness me, we've covered so much. You know, I feel that we could probably talk for another hour, but thank you so much for coming on the show. This can be a great show for our listeners. And as I say, you know, for our listeners, if you want to kind of pick up, you know, anything that, you know, any of the projects that Giovanna has talked about today, check out our social media sites, and we'll have all of our links on social media. So I just want to say thank you again, Giovanna, for coming on the show. That was amazing.
And thank you for having me. See ya.